Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Rusa Slina Idrus from the Gender Studies Seminar. I'm really pleased to welcome you to our first webinar series of the semester. Um, and we're here with two speakers who will be talking about co-acting, refugee researchers acting with refugee women. We have Ms. Kirandip Kaur and Ms. Naima Ismail, my co-convener and colleague Vila will introduce them a bit later. Just for a little couple of logistical issues, we are here. We do ask everyone to stay muted during the presentation, and then later if you have questions you can unmute. You can also use the chat box if you want to put any questions or comments in. At this moment, if anyone who's coming in, we encourage to introduce yourself so we have an idea who's around, and also it's a way to say hi in this world where we're not able to see each other. But it's wonderful to see people from all over the world here today at this time, and it's really wonderful, and it's a testament, I think, to this very interesting topic that we have today on co-acting. I'd like to then to also acknowledge that this webinar today is co-organized with colleagues at the CHCI Global Humanities Institute, which focuses the theme for this year's Migration, Logistics and Unequal Citizens. With that, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Vila Shini Somia, but let me just quickly introduce her a little bit. Dr. Vila is a Sabahan anthropologist who received her PhD from the National University of Singapore. She is currently a senior lecturer here at the Gender Studies program at the University of Malaya, and she maintains a keen interest for underrepresented narratives of women, migrants, and Bornean living in the interiors. Outside of academia, she writes ethnographic articles on the local socio-political landscape. So I think many people also know Dr. Vila. She's very active on the webinar scene as well. So with that, Vila, I leave the space to you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. The introduction is really quite sweet. So thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today in a very, very thunderstormy, rainy Kuala Lumpur right now. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a perfect time for us here, and I guess anywhere else that you're joining us from, to have to be really intrigued by the wonderful work that women of all walks of life are essentially doing. If you hear these really loud sort of sounds coming, it's either an elephant or it's the thunderstorm. So I assure you, for now, it is a thunderstorm. Please forgive me if it's a little louder than me. I will do my best to sort of speak in between Mother Nature. So as Lynn has so wonderfully pointed out, this particular seminar is part of the gender seminar series that we try very often to have once every few months, and we've always been graced by scholars and people who are and researchers who've been doing wonderful work out there, very important work, might I add, in the field of gender and other forms of interdisciplinary work as well. So today we have two wonderful speakers with us. I'd like to introduce our speakers and basically the kind of work that they've embarked on, without touching too much on their presentation, which they'll go into in a while. The first, of course, is Naima Ismail. She is a Somali refugee, women's activist, and the leader of SWAM. Naima, please correct me if I'm wrong. Very, very passionate about health policy and the challenges that Somali women in Kuala Lumpur face. Naima has been a Somali refugee women's activist for quite a number of years, if I'm not mistaken, and that she has worked very closely with international organizations such as the UNHCR, and really focuses on a lot on issues of health as well as trauma and, the challenges of sort of surviving and bringing livelihood back to refugee women and their families in Kuala Lumpur and in Malaysia. She is presenting today with her co-presenter, Ms. Kirandip Kaur, who is a PhD candidate, currently based in Tilburg University and the University of Oslo. Kiran is, in the final stages of writing her thesis at this moment, and it is a project that really sort of straddles in between law, development, and the sort of participatory action research that really is becoming very popular in academia today. It is really new and innovating ways of presenting work that also acknowledges and returns agency back to the people that we take information from. But again, she will talk more about this later. She's also a communication in science lecturer. She's worked in the medical field. She's worked with medical scholars in the past, and she's done many years of fantastic, interesting work in this particular space. So without further ado, I would like to hand this wonderful platform to Kiran and Naima to start. But before that, I would like to remind everybody that at the end of their presentation, we will go into a Q&A. So whatever questions you will have, please have them prepared, and I'll be there to sort of moderate through it. So thank you very much. And Kiran and Naima, we look forward to this. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lena and Vila, for such a kind introduction. And thank you so much for inviting us here today to speak together. Both myself and Naima are really happy to be able to do this. And it's actually the first opportunity for us to actually do a presentation together. So that's quite exciting. So as I've already been introduced, my name is Kirandip Kaur. You can call me Kiran. I'm a doctoral researcher in law and development over in Tilburg University, a part of the EDELAD project, which I'll talk a little bit about shortly. And I am also a communication and science lecturer, which means I teach academic skills along with writing and presentations at Leiden University Medical Center. Now, this is something that I'll come back to a little bit later in my talk, particularly around why it's so important that we teach these skills. Right now, I want to give you a little bit of summary of the work that I did in Malaysia with Naima and how I met her. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we ended up here today. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Naima, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience of working with researchers and working with me. And hopefully she has some nice things to say about me. We'll see. But what I'd like to show is, yes, here we go. So we're going to just quickly go over how we ended up here. And after Naima's talk, I will be speaking a little bit more about what co-acting actually means for me and why this is an important subject for us all to try and engage in. I'm going to talk a little bit more about participatory action research and the kinds of things that I've done post fieldwork, so after my doctoral project. And then we're going to bring this back to Naima, who's going to talk about what SWAM is currently doing, the challenges that they have, and hopefully what other researchers based in Malaysia might wish to do with her. So any kind of ideas and projects that you may have. And we hope in the Q&A that we'll be able to have a much wider discussion about all these ideas, but also maybe even brainstorm some new ones. So we're hoping for some innovative conversations as well. I will just come out after Naima has spoken with a few last words. But we really are quite excited to be able to talk today about this project. And we hope that we give some inspiration as well as gain some for ourselves. So we're looking forward to this. Now, you may have noticed on the slides already that there is this watermark. And in fact, this watermark is going to be on all the slides. The reason for this is that we are going to today share some of our work with you. So a lot of this work is some of the creative works, the ideas from the refugee communities that I've been working with, a little bit from my own PhD, although I'm not going to be going into that too much today. And whilst we're really excited to share this work and we really want it to be seen, we have unfortunately we've been aware that it's not always been used by people in what might be the most respectful way for refugee communities. Naima and myself will talk about this a little bit more during our presentations. But what we mean by respectful is respectful of intellectual property and this right to privacy and data protection, particularly around the ideas which come from the refugees themselves. So for this reason, we've decided that we're not going to share our slides, and we do request that you don't screenshot anything from the slides, not even for yourselves. But to make up for this, we are more than happy to share our contact information. You're more than welcome to get in touch with us. We're very excited to speak with you. We are going to share the links for the websites so that you can see the work up there. But we simply won't be sharing the slides themselves today. So we hope that you can respect that. This is an idea that we want to come back to because we think it's quite important, and Naima especially will be talking a little bit more about this. So with that kind of logistical information out the way, let's get into who we are. So as I said, I started this through my doctoral project. I've actually been working with refugees on and off since 2005, which is quite a while ago. But I met Naima back in 2017 in Kuala Lumpur when I was conducting my action research project for the fieldwork in my law and development doctoral project. Now, this is a part of the EDELAD program. It's a European doctorate in law and development, and it's a collaboration between a number of different universities based in Europe and in South Africa. Now, you can find out a little bit more information about my own project over at my website, and there are links to the EDELAD project as well if you want to see. I have some colleagues who are working in some really fascinating areas of law and development related to human rights, rule of law, environmental rights in different developing countries, and it's quite an exciting project. So please do go take a look at that. In my own project, I wanted to focus on forced migrants' voices. In particular, I wanted to learn a little bit more about their own lived experiences, what it felt to live the experiences of law. So I wanted to use them as my starting point. I stayed for about a year, more or less, in Malaysia, living with the different forced migrant communities. I worked with 4 different communities, the Syrian, Somali, Afghan, and Rohingya communities. And during this time, I was teaching, researching, having quite a lot of fun as well, just connecting with the communities, particularly the refugee leaders and the refugee-led organizations. Now, I met some amazing people during this time who were really energetically trying to make positive changes for their own communities. Naima was one of these people, one of the most inspiring people I met. And together we were able to do quite a few interesting things, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. Now, because I was using an action research approach, by which I mean there is less of a power relationship between the researcher and the participants, we decided that we wanted to try and keep contact and try and find ways to collaborate after the fieldwork was over. I'm going to in this talk about 3 of the ways that we did that after my fieldwork, but there's one that I want to mention now, which was a collaboration between myself, Amin Kamrani, who's a photographer, and the Living Refugee Archive. Now, Paul Dudman is actually here with us today, so I hope when we're doing the questions, he'll speak a little bit about the Living Refugee Archive, so I'm only going to give a really brief overview. In this particular project that we did together, we decided to create a collaborative virtual photo exhibition. Now, this exhibition was set up by Amin Kamrani. He called it his 2020 exhibition. And he wanted to sell some of his photography to be able to support refugee communities. Amin's been working with refugee communities for quite a number of years now, and working very closely in partnership with them. Now, his photography, I think, is absolutely stunning. He really highlights what it means to be a migrant, living and working across borders, both, and he can portray these both the sense of lack as well as the sense of plenty, without ever victimizing people in his photography. It's a very simple focus on their lived realities and their hopes and their dreams in a way that presents people as people. So I really do recommend you go and check out his virtual gallery. There is an option to buy if you want to support the refugee communities, and all of this is available on the Living Refugee Archive website. And it was actually based on this project that we decided to try and put together a photo voice journal for the Displaced Voices journal, which was set up by, again, the Living Refugee Archive. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a lot of time to talk about photo voice, but very simply, this is where the communities themselves take control of the camera, and they choose the photos that best represent themselves and what they want to communicate to the world. And they do this without anyone else framing it or editing those photos to suit their own agendas and needs. So please do ask more about this if you want to know more. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic and the lockdown and all the rest of it, we were unable to actually do the photo voice in the end because we weren't able to meet with the communities in person. So instead, I decided to reconnect with the refugee women who I worked with previously in Malaysia to be able to put together their stories and write their stories in a way that supported what they wanted to show, so that allowed them control of the narratives. Now, they did also choose some of the photography that's available, and this became the Displaced Voices Journal, special issue in their own voices. Naima was one of the writers in this journal, and she, along with myself, worked together to write something to highlight the health inequities that the refugee women face living in Kuala Lumpur. Now, other of the women showed really other different interesting ideas of what it feels like to live in Kuala Lumpur. So I really do recommend you to take a look at this journal if you get a chance. The foreword is by the Associate Professor Nergis Khanifa. She's based over in the Center for Refugee Studies in York University in Canada. And throughout this journal, we talk about this idea of what it means to get involved in what we called inclusive publishing, i.e. publishing about research, but with the communities. This is an idea, again, that I'll talk about a little bit later. So just to bring this back to Naima, we wanted to use this journal today now as a springboard to be able to talk more and find more spaces to be able to communicate what it actually feels like from the refugee perspective to work with researchers. We frequently talk about it from the researcher's perspective, but we wanted to bring in what it actually feels like for them. And this is the reason why we then decided to get involved to engage in this project today. So I think I've given you quite a brief overview, but if there's anything else you'd like to know, please do ask us. I'm going to hand over to Naima now. And I hope that we get a chance to explore some of these ideas. If there's anything we've missed, please do ask us. So Naima, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Naima Ismail. I am the leader of the Somali Women's Association Malaysia. I'm originally from Somalia, and I have been in Malaysia for 5 years as a refugee. But you know, I am more than this. I have a degree in public health, which I decided to use to support the Somali women right here in Kuala Lumpur. So during these times, I have connected with many NGOs, institutions, and researchers to work on health and education project to the Somali women in my community. So I can say I'm experienced in working with both my community and professionals. And today I'm going to talk about working with researchers specifically. So there are many challenges and positives and impact that research can have on me as a health leader and on my community that I need researchers to understand. Later, I'll give you some examples about my organization, and also first, I want to talk about the pointless research and how this feels for us and on my community when researchers do not engage. But don't worry, it's not all bad. I will also give some positive examples that I have come across during my journey. In this talk, I want you to make sure that you understand how you can make research right for us, how important our voices are, and how your research can impact us socially, ethically, and as humans. So let's get into the challenges. Researchers and NGOs often come to work with me without engaging with our communities or having insight into the refugee communities. Often the engagement we have with the researchers is when they take data and never come back, or explain what the data means, how they will use or publish our words and pictures. We are usually unsure if they actually give us credit, if they publish or use our words, our work, or ideas. So we do not know even if they really understand our situation. I believe you cannot reflect or describe who refugees are through one or two meetings with sitting with refugee members to have a proper knowledge to write about our lives. Also, researchers often do not explain how or if their research match our community's goals and needs. What's more, it seems to me that researchers do not respect our knowledge or experience of already knowing research practices. It has happened to me that researchers contact me, and when I asked of the consent forms and code of conduct or their research goals, they stop the contact. Next time I discover it, they have connected with other refugee members who barely ask us these questions. So researchers may not give consent forms or explain to the women refugees how their research may impact us socially, ethically, professionally, and also academically. Without consent forms, I believe they are weakening their long-term engagement with the community. So for example, SWAM asks consent forms and code of conduct, whatever, to protect the data and the privacy for the Somali women in my community. This means we have to work with the researchers without any written. So as you can see, researchers who do not engage with us can cause many challenges and leave us voiceless, devalued, and dehumanized. However, this is only true when researchers do not give us respect. What I mean that we refugees have a huge impact when researchers respect us. So when we have health engaged relationships with researchers, we can always find a positive outcome. So let's talk some of the positive examples that I have come across. I found researchers who spoke to me in a human way, and together we found ways to speak co-actively and collectively. Most importantly, they didn't speak for me, but with me. For instance, I want to give an example. I met Kiran back in 2017 in Malaysia, and after she left, she kept in contact. As refugee leaders, this is a very unique for us, as most people, when once they leave Malaysia, they do not keep contact. We every time communicate with Kiran, and she's always pleased to speak with us or to work with us. Since she left, she has supported me with writing proposals, updating CVs, writing article on health inequities with Living Refugee Archives. And now, as you can see, we are presenting together in this presentation. So this is the sort of co-working we expect from researchers. Give back whatever you've taken from the community. Give back your time, your effort, and tell us how you really use this real evidence. This is also leads to me in teaching and training. Pay us for our time with something useful. This is a real payment the use of our services and our venue space, but also you as researchers, you also have knowledge and skills to help us improve our work and experience as refugee leaders. If possible, anytime we work or act together, please consider how you can add value to our work through capacity building. For example, provide us teaching or training skills to our members. For example, teach us about Malaysia, train us on how we help and build our communities, how we can help build relations, for instance, to the local people, to the outside world. Train us on your cultures, as we always have cultural diversities. Teach us about basic Malaysian laws, teach us about refugee rights in Malaysia, etc. As we also equip you our stories, our lives, and our cultures. Please do not only see our needs as refugees. We have assets, we have capacities, and most of all, we have potential as leaders. In my case, as a health worker, this is also means to me that when you come to us, please do not come to us with a fixed plan for the training. Instead, build it together with us. And there are sometimes some cultural issues that you may need to respect while engaging with us. So build trust by not only focusing on your own research and how to access our data. Instead, let's learn from each other and let's break the stereotypes. Finally, if possible, make a space to speak with us when you present or publish your own research. For example, today, I can speak with Karen and I can give my perspective on what research means to me and my community. In this special issue, we also wrote together with my ideas on what are the most important issues for Somali community, Somali women, and their challenge to accessing healthcare. I have this knowledge, so I have written with Karen. Through Karen's support, I could write about it, and now published in my own voice with her. I can understand that we cannot always write or see researchers every time, but if there are times when we can give our perspective, please let's find this space and have a voice together. To recap, there are 3 simple rules to have a healthy, engaged relationship with us. Keep contact, build our capacity, and let's speak together. Simple. These 3 simple rules means that when your research is not burden or only a take action, but it's useful and meaningful to me. Remember, I want to do something meaningful and useful to my community. So do not speak for me. Instead, let's act as one in unity. But do you really believe refugees are the same as you are? And do you remember we are all human too? All of this means you start by respecting us first as human. When you give us respect, then it has a great important impact on us. Why I say that, if I can have more access to knowledge and believe more in my own capacity, this is the most important, that I can do whatever I can do, I need to do for my community. So when you respect us, we feel valued and have a voice. And we are human. We feel we are human as everyone else. This has a great impact and important on us. Most of the times we work with Malaysians also. So it's very rare we work with internationals. We need to feel safe with the local people here. And through working with us more and co-actively and collectively, we can only feel more safer and connected on the ground. Through keep contact with us, I know we can ask questions always, get journal articles or brainstorm solutions to the problems on the ground with your knowledge. Through training, I know I can make better application for funding, learn from my mistakes, and build a strong relationship between my community and with the outside world. But we as refugees, we feel isolated and we need to be connected with the world again with your help. Finally, if you let me speak with you and write with you, I have the chance to give my point of view, and this makes me and you as researcher stronger. So finally, please do not waste my time with your pointless research, which doesn't benefit me or the women in my community. Please don't also call me as, or see me as a refugee only. Call me public health leader, call me the woman leader, and value my knowledge, then we can make something new together. Today, I have talked mainly about researchers, but a lot of what I said is also true with some of my work with the NGOs. Therefore, I just need to stress to you, to all of you, that I have a voice and I can speak for myself. So now I ask you, what can we do together? I'm now going to hand over to Kiran. She's going to talk a lot about some of the ideas that I brought up here and what co-acting means for her as a researcher.
Okay, guys, thank you, Naima, for your talk. And it's such an interesting perspective to be able to hear what you feel and what you believe about research, because it's something that often I feel is rather neglected. So thank you. I won't cover all of Naima's points again. I certainly agree with them, and I certainly support her 3 rules for engagement. It's something that I try very hard to do. But I want to kind of add to her points. So I want to broaden it back out. I want to switch back to what it feels like from the researcher's perspective, and what it means for us, because we obviously have some slightly different complexities to deal with, and we have certainly different obligations. So when we usually connect with communities, we usually connect with them as objects of research. You're distant from the point of view of the researcher, you try and see them as a point of analysis, and there's some sense of understanding why people generally do this. In my own project, which draws on law, I decided to switch to a community development approach. Now, a community development approach is certainly not new. It's pretty old, in fact. It's been done for more decades than I can talk about. But under this approach, communities are active agents. They're not passive. They don't passively receive benefits. We don't passively observe them. But we want to see how active they are in terms of what they can do for their own communities and how they can connect actively with research and create transformative change. Now, often marginalized groups such as refugees have very little space to have a voice in any kind of a public space, particularly in the media or policy level, or again, within research. So the aim of my participatory action research and community development perspective to law is that I wanted to include marginalized people in the research so that they could feel more comfortable having a voice in their own public space, wherever they happen to be in, and whatever it is that they chose to speak about, particularly in relation to projects and laws and policies and so on, which impact their lives and that they don't often get to say much about. So for me, I switched the starting point. So rather than looking at the law, I switched down to the refugee voices perspective and then looked up at what law might mean to them. And there's a number of lessons that I learned here. Firstly, that like Naima says, everything starts and ends and restarts with a conversation around engagement. What does it mean to engage with people? So much like Naima, I also agree that this connection to the community is the very most important starting point. And it is, in fact, the main priority. But I also had to take a lot of time during my project to consider, well, what does it actually mean to engage? And I came to the idea of thinking about research communication. Now, this is also influenced by my job where I'm a communications lecturer, but from the point of view of my work with the communities in Malaysia, we discovered quite quickly that it was quite tough to keep in contact, particularly when I now live on the other side of the world. I live in the Netherlands, Naima is over in Malaysia, and all the other people I've worked with, some of you have joined us today, are also in Malaysia. Keeping that contact was rather difficult. And if I was going to find this basis for collaboration, the first very simple thing I needed to do was to simply keep talking. Whatever this conversation was about, and find ways and find spaces where we could connect. Now, this simple idea of keeping talking, asking how you are, what is happening in your life, this then started to build what I discovered to be kind of a very loose platform where we're able to start to create small scale projects in the communities. Now, some of these projects I managed to connect with the Living Refugee Archive, and my conversations with Paul Dedman, and we tried to figure out in our own way what we tried to make as a collaborative approach with the communities. Later, we determined this as a co-active or co-acting approach. We decided we need to move beyond just the concept of participation, where we have a project and communities participate with us, to consider how, particularly in the research communication side of things, we could have a space for a voice and support the community voices in what they were choosing to lead themselves. And by this research communication dissemination, I mean the ways in which we as researchers tend to make public and visible the outputs of our research. Traditionally, this is done in rather simple ways, i.e. publishing, presentations, but there is a world outside of that. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about it in a moment. But what I realized is over the last few years, quite unconsciously, without necessarily intending to, I had built a collaborative platform with my participants. And simply by this action of having the platform, I had engaged in research communication, quite without intending to. The other thing that we learned is that we cannot give anyone a voice. It's quite simply, it's not possible for us to do this. Refugees and asylum seekers already have a voice. The best we could do was to try and open up a space so that those on the margins can speak and we can learn to actively listen as they share their experiences and allow them to lead. So when I was working with the Living Refugee Archive, we tried to remember this. We tried to use this as our starting point. And this idea of sharing experience between us, we then use that as the basis of what we termed as our co-action. Now, we also realize that there is an important caveat to this, that in creating this space, we may inadvertently create a burden on the refugee communities, that we're expecting them to suddenly be more active and speak on particular issues. So what we then try to return this is finding ways for us to listen and to actively listen. So again, refugee researchers and activists, we cannot necessarily give a voice, but the most important thing we can do is provide this space to support the voices of people who wish to speak when they wish to speak, try and support them to create their own narratives and shape them, and the creativities that they have in the projects that they wish to lead. Now, a lot of the time this means waiting and taking our time. But this idea of research communication now, rather than being about my outputs for my findings, but actually becoming this kind of facilitating role and this role of opening space, is what led us to really do some of the more interesting projects that I've been involved in the last couple of years. I've been very fortunate to be involved in. Now, what do I mean by these narratives and voices and so on? So refugee stories are usually told with rather familiar tropes. We have very particular stereotypes that Naima mentioned in her talk. There's particular structures to the way that they speak. And in the Living Refugee Archive special issue, we wanted to challenge that only those in power get to write the histories of people. That histories, by the way, that people come to remember in the future. Now, the narratives from marginalized communities are often missing in historical records. Sometimes their suffering is erased, their oppression is quite easily forgotten. But more importantly, their agency in terms of constituting that history and making it into a living history is usually forgotten. Now, this is a quote from Paul, which I rather like. And Paul states in the special issue that we wrote together that it was through hearing the voices of refugees and others on the margin of society, that we can start to learn new ways to document and create what he termed as a living history of refugeehood. In our work together, we did try and draw quite heavily on participatory action research values. But again, we wanted to move a little bit away from just participatory action to co-action. So we worked quite hard to find a way to create an editing process to co-write, which inevitably ended up meaning me having to use the other side of my skills and act as a lecturer in communication science to teach particularly what it means to write academically, what it means to communicate academically, what it means to communicate in a structured way. Naima's talk, as you might have heard today, is beautifully structured. She worked incredibly hard on it. We spent a lot of time together trying to figure out how she would articulate. So we did some training again in academic presentations. This was a nice build-up from her, the work on the article that we did together where I was teaching her about writing academically. But by teaching them these very simple skills, we were trying to support them to articulate their own experiences as much as possible within their own voices. So you'll find that each of the chapters are still rather unique. As a team, we then had to try and figure out how we were going to use the Refugee Living Archive as a supportive platform. Their testimonies and experiences are often easily forgotten, but when we start to think about it in terms of communicating from our perspective with the research goals that we had, we found that actually there could be a very interesting way to document some of my own findings and theories, but have it from their perspective. So we decided to term this co-writing experience inclusive publishing. Now, this archival and documentation of refugee voices, it doesn't need to actually only take place in a formal archive. And that's certainly not what we're suggesting either. We do certainly believe that this documentation of narratives can happen in a number of ways. This is simply only one of them. The special issue, we were looking at trying to break open the rather rigid structures of academic writing to talk about publications in a more open way. This may mean actually actively breaking some academic conventions. One of the things that we decided to get rid of pretty early was the idea of referencing and sourcing for the refugee articles, although we did use it in our own, but to try and create as much of a legitimacy around their voices and what they wanted to talk about. So we wanted to think about what inclusive publishing means. Now, one of the questions I have for the very experienced guests that we have today is, what do you think inclusive publishing could mean? And what ways might we be able to combine our voices with refugees when we're talking about this form of communicating our narratives? Now, this is a question I hope that we get to talk about, but I don't believe there's any perfect answers here, and we certainly don't have them. But we do think that the co-writing aspect could be a really interesting one to explore in the future. The other aspects that I'm particularly very interested in and quite passionate about is working with visual media. I know that Paul is now going on to work with theatre, which I hope he gets to talk about. It's a rather exciting idea of recording narrative. For myself, I quite enjoy the photography. So one of the ways that I did this was in Coimbra University in Portugal, where I hosted a Valorizing Voices photo exhibition. We were finding ways that the refugees themselves can take photos that represented their own views. Now, this one in particular rather touched me, was done by a gentleman who was from Syria, and he was a dentist in his own country. And he decided to take a photo showing this broken keyboard with a toothbrush, and how this toothbrush, which used to represent the status of his profession, was now being used to clean electronics in the country that he now found himself in as a refugee. I find this visual methods of preserving narratives incredibly powerful. And I think this is something which we as researchers can easily engage in, but it also means giving up control. So the communities themselves choose what they want to create. They choose the captions, they choose how it's represented. Here is a very simple photo of someone's passport, but it's darkened through this image with the light coming through, again, representing what they now felt was an important aspect of their life being suddenly darkened. You'll also notice that there's no faces in either of these photos. They chose not to have their own faces. This also means, in a certain sense, there's no dehumanization, and I think that's quite important. There's no way in which people are being devalued. The communities themselves chose to demonstrate the aspects of their lives in a way that was simple visual statement of their skills, their lives, and how they feel they are now. And I think this is a very powerful method that we can engage in. This exhibition is not online, but some of the photos are available on my website, and I've discussed a little bit more about them in detail if you'd like to see. Finally, so in top of inclusive publishing and the idea of visual methods as a way of representing community voices, the other action that I've taken since the field work was to be engaged in collaboration or collaboration workshops. So the Rohingya project was one of the projects that I worked with, and we chose together to create a collaboration workshop. That was one of the needs that the communities mentioned for themselves. And with them, so the Rohingya project, just in case you haven't heard of it, uses the concept of digital identity and blockchain technology to create a platform for financial inclusion and empowerment for stateless Rohingya. Now, the project was interesting because the first thing I had to acknowledge is that I simply don't have the skills to help you. I don't have the knowledge of blockchain. I'm very hazy around the legal issues around this. It's a very difficult project for me to actually contribute in. But what we discovered is that I do have connections. So what we used the workshop to do is to create a space for collaboration. We had 3 sessions, 3 focused discussions, which were aimed to create a practical outcome and building partnerships between the Rohingya project and other academic institutions and researchers. We also invited a couple of NGOs and legal clinics. Now, by setting up this space for open discussion and simply for Mohammed Noor and the Rohingya project team to simply share about their projects, discuss them in and around these 3 concepts, and for other partners, potential partners, to come on board and simply talk about how they felt about it, we managed to brainstorm quite a few interesting ideas and potential ways forward. And they did, as a result of the workshop, end up creating a few new partnerships and being able to move on, particularly around the idea of archiving, and which is another narrative project. I was quite really interested to see what they produce from that. Now, all of this actions that I've done since my fieldwork were not also without challenges. In fact, there have been a lot of difficulties. Now, I do believe that the collaborations I've done have been incredibly important, and they have been led by the communities in most parts. They're the ones who've come to me generally to give me their ideas and for us to find ways to try and make it possible. But it is hard work on behalf of the researcher, particularly for early career refugee PhD researchers. Often these styles of action that I've done, co-acting, co-publishing, hosting events together, they aren't necessarily valorized within academia. And they're certainly not valued in terms of our career progressions easily. We've all heard the phrase publish or perish, but publishing with communities is not necessarily encouraged. And an open access journal that's new and starting out and trying innovative methods, does that count as a high impact publication? It might be high impact from the perspective of NIMA and the other communities, but not necessarily in terms of academia. So I'll admit there was quite a bit of frustration sometimes in how little impact it feels from my own perspective, and sometimes how little support there is generally in the infrastructure of departments and the way that academics, we form our work. And this particularly makes my work as an early career researcher quite a daunting prospect now that I'm trying to find ways to create co-active approaches. But I do believe that finding these methods to reconnect with communities and participants and building these relations and creating these platforms have been incredibly rewarding and have given me more knowledge as a researcher on their issues and what it is that we hope to achieve together. So another question I have for you that I want to ask is, what is it that academia can do, and particularly those of you who have who are higher up in academia in departments and universities, what is it that we can do to valorize this co-acting engagement between researchers and communities, particularly with marginalized communities? What is it that we can do to create that supportive atmosphere? We've already heard from Naima's perspective of how important and impactful this is. What can we do to actually create the structures to make this more valuable? Now, on that note, I'm going to turn back to Naima so she can talk to us about what we could possibly do with her and SWAM.
Hello again, everyone. So let me give you some more details about SWAM. We are a very small grassroots organization that help the Somali women, refugees, and asylum seeking. We provide support groups, English and Malay classes, childcare, leadership training, and many more. Our biggest challenge currently is sustainability, especially during this time with COVID-19 and the lockdowns. We can't currently proceed with the livelihood project, for example. Money projects are weakened due this time. So we need researchers to engage with projects that benefit the sustainability of our project. For example, engage us by connecting to the rest of the world, to us, introduce us to outsiders, people with resources, people who can offer us support, skills and knowledge, people who can act with us. For example, with the livelihoods, we need to connect with Malaysians better. What products are they interested in? For instance, explore the market and understand how we can use this as our assets as Somali women to create small businesses to generate their own income. In regards to health, we also need counselors or mental health experts to support our women. There are many more areas of interest, so feel free to ask in the question. I will hand over to Kiran, who will wrap up our main presentation, I think. Yes, Kiran?
Thank you, Naima. So these are some of our contact details. Please do feel free to get in touch with us. This is Naima's email here that you can contact on her directly if you wish to communicate with her. She's also on Twitter and on Instagram. She's far more active on social media than I am. I apologize. But you can contact me via my website as well. We hope that this has been interesting, and we hope that we've, whilst we may have been slightly challenging, we hope that it's brought up some interesting questions for you, which we would love to hear now.
Thank you so much, Naima and Kiran. Thank you very much. That was such a wonderful presentation. Like, I think, you know, a lot of very, very powerful things that needed to be said or are not said enough, especially in the field of research. As an anthropologist myself and my peers, majority of us, if not anthropologists, but, you know, work very closely with communities that are marginalized in many different forms or suffer from different oppressions. We are certainly constantly concerned about the way academia has had a long history of certainly borrowing or taking information, experiences from communities and essentially ghosting them, right? So in many ways, what Naima and Kiran has showed us or talked about today has resonates a lot in the work in the works that a lot of researchers do. So there are quite a number of questions that we are left there, apart from, you know, basically your all your fans basically saying what a great job the both of you have done. Before I go and open the floor to potential questions, there are essentially some questions here that I'd like to raise. The first one is from Ayu Abdullah. I believe this is for both Naima and Kiran. By the way, the way we will be taking questions is, let us collect, say, maybe 2 or 3 at a time. Kiran, Naima, pay attention to, keep track of the questions that I'm asking you, and then I'll let you answer, and then we'll go back to the floor and collect more. If that's okay with the both of you? Yeah? Wonderful. As I said, so for Naima and Kiran, this is from Ayu Abdullah. How would you define or describe the key differences between participatory action and co-action? There is another one from Mathilda Ho, who also thanks the both of you and wants to ask about the ethics of research and the collaboration process. Aside from letting refugees lead as much as possible, what are some good practices we can adopt when working with communities? Would like to hear from Kiran and Naima. There is also a call for, you know, having Paul speak about the use of theatre. Paul, if you don't mind, we're going to let the ladies answer first. We would love to hear from Paul Dutman, but we're just going to sort of give time to Kiran and Naima to answer questions first before we go to you, yeah? So Kiran and Naima, after they are done with this round of questions, we'd like to open it to the floor to anybody who may want to ask. Please give your name and where you're from. So Kiran and Naima, would you like to answer the 2 questions first?
Naima, would you like to go first, or would you like me to speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So so the first question was around the idea of difference between participatory action research and co-acting. I actually think there's actually quite a lot of crossover. But the main point that I would like to make here is not necessarily that we as PAR action researchers do not allow collaborative space, or that we don't. In fact, that's the entire purpose of PAR and action research. Action research as a field is actually quite old, and it's a very wide and varied field. A lot of people take different perspectives. Some people come from the Kurt Lewin perspective, or I tend to use more of the Paulo Freire perspective, which is rather radical and transformative change. So the idea of collaboration is there within all of action research. The main point is, though, it still starts with the researcher. So we are still, as researchers, choosing to create that open space. So we're still going to the communities and saying, hi, we'd like to live and learn from you and work with you, but we are taking that step forward. What I think that was interesting with the idea when I was speaking with Paul was that we were trying to figure out, well, to what extent can we allow them to lead, and how can we do that, and how can we create that space? So the idea of co-acting for us really was for it to be community driven. So for the actions that we wish to take to be community driven. So to start with the communities, and for us to simply create the space where they come to us and say, this is what we want, and these are the actions we'd like to take. So there's not much of a difference. We get to the same point at the end, but we were hoping to try and place the emphasis rather on the action, or the acting and the process of acting, and creating that space where communities could come to us. So that was the answer to the first question. In terms of ethics, well, shall I pass over to Naima before I talk about the ethics?
Sure.
Yeah.
Naima?
Yeah. Naima, how do you feel about the idea of community bringing up ideas to researchers?
I think you have mentioned all the points I needed to say. You've covered almost. So in the participatory action, it's not much difference on co-action research, because we are not participating as the fact that we are taking your research or something, but it's something that we need to know how these evidence being used in, and our voices, how it's being used and how it's being cooperated with you, but it's not yours only. So having the credit all along and maybe using this in a long-term, you know, purposes without our consent, that's a little bit of, you know, dehumanizing us.
Yeah, and I think that's really the issue around the ethics. Usually, when we talk about ethical procedures from the university perspective, we have to go to an ethics committee. We need to go through certain processes, GDPR, and so on. And we absolutely need to do that. I think they're really important safeguards. However, I think for my own research, I also engaged and created my own do no harm approach, where rather than the ethical part being a conversation that was had at the start of the fieldwork and that was it, it was something which we came back to repeatedly. So I did an ongoing do no harm process. So every week I'd come back and update and reflect and see what the ethical issues were that were occurring and how my presence with the community may create harm or not, and how we can mitigate that. One of the important things that Naima just mentioned is this extractive process. And I think what the collaboration and simply slowing down and allowing people to speak takes away from some of that extraction. This sense of people taking our voices and then using it without our consent or not our fully informed consent. And the continued relationship afterwards also, I think, plays into that, because you can go back and I can say, Naima, I discovered this in my findings. How do you feel about it? Or I discovered this. What do you think this could mean? Or would it be harmful if I published on this? And so that ethical discussion then becomes a dialogue that's continued. I think that's an important point to remember with any participatory action research, is to have that continued ethical discussion, not only the discussion we need to have with our institution, that it's one that continues into the community.
Thank you very much, Kiran and Naima. Now, of course, Paul Dutman has shared quite some resources for us to use in the chat. Paul, will come to you when we're a little bit one more round of questions. Don't worry, I won't forget. We'll definitely hear from you as well. But I'd like to ask if anybody is interested. Could you sort of unmute now? Tell us where you're from and your name. Anyone?
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, can you hear me?
Muhaira.
Okay.
Hi, Muhaira.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm from Development Studies Department, Faculty of Economics in UM. So I find this talk a very eye-opening. We've had a very eye-opening discussion on this partnering, co-acting in research. This is something that my colleagues and I have not actually ventured into. And I'd like to thank Kiran and also Naima for this really, really good discussion. I just have a few questions. Firstly, to both Kiran and Naima. One of the challenges that we are facing as an academician in Malaysia is that we have this intention to speak to the refugees, to the those people, vulnerable groups and all that. But the approach, how to approach them, is one of the challenges that one of the challenges that we face. I was just wondering, one of the approach that I use, because I work with children and women as well, is I approach NGOs instead of going straight to the leaders of the community and all that, because I don't know them, and I feel that NGOs, I don't know whether I'm right to assume this, NGOs somehow work closely with the vulnerable groups and the refugees. So I tend to go to them to get to the community. I want your opinion whether that is one of the good ways to actually approach the community, to get to the community leaders, and because we don't have the direct context to the communities. And I also want to know whether, you know, Naima, especially, you're open to give talks to my students in the university to create awareness on the issues that you're facing, on the ethics issues. And I feel that not just the student, even the lecturers, the researchers, you know, would learn a lot from you. I don't know whether you're open to that. And I also want to know, Naima, whether you have also developed close ties with other leaders of community from other countries other than Somalia. Do you have close network? If we were to approach you, to work with you and to understand you better and to actually build connection, do you also have links to other groups and we can work together? So that's all the questions that I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Naima, do you want to answer this?
Yeah, I'll just start the last lines of the question. You can answer the first few lines. Oh, okay. Yes, I'm connected with the other refugee leaders, and there are certain projects that we are working together. So we know the situation of each other, and we kind of cooperate together. Yeah, I'm very open to the students to learn from each other, not to learn from me. This is a learning process for every one of us. And you talked about how to engage and build the trust approaching to the refugee communities. I tell you, it's not easy to just get the trust from our members. It takes time. I mean, it takes a long time. It's kind of, you need to run a support group or counseling with mental health patients. We know, I mean, how long that trust takes to build up. So I remember back in 2017, when Karen was in Malaysia, when she called me up to meet her up, and I was really, you know, scared to meet her. Why she wants to call me, or what she wants. I didn't even know the value of what she's doing or what her research was about. But I was avoiding to meet her just to make sure that my data and privacy is not being used without my consent and all that. So I didn't have I wasn't equipped enough to, you know, mingle with the refugees and kind of learn from them a lot. So it took maybe a year. Yeah. So that needs really a long time of patience. But what you can do is you can never give up and continue to talk to the people with experiences. I mean, if you come, some researchers, as I mentioned earlier, they come to they engage with us, but when they see that we are little bit experienced, then they go to the other members who barely know or have any experiences, which is what makes our voices always down and invisible. Yeah, over to you, Karen.
Thank you for that, Naima. Yes, you were quite difficult when I first arrived, in the most lovely way, of course, because it was entirely understandable. For me, I think it did take literally the entire year to build trust, and afterwards as well, continue to build trust. I had to work very hard to take time. I arrived in Malaysia with nothing. I didn't have any contacts or basis for supports. I knew one NGO who introduced me literally in one meeting to a couple of community leaders. And after that, I just made an agreement to pop into their organization, just observe, nothing more. And they just got to know me. I attended refugee events and just very naturally allowed space for relationships to grow. And the other thing that I did, and I think is really important that perhaps we should have said in the presentation, is allow a space for no. it doesn't have to always just be, yes, we'll do this, yes, we'll do that, or yes, we'll do everything you want. I think both parties need to be able to say no, and that space for no should be a space for innovation. So not something that we should be frightened of or see as a conflicted space, or that this is going to create a problem if we say no to each other, or I can't do this, or that's not what we want. But instead for it to be like, great, that's a no, let's try and see what might work as a yes. And just to allow that to be a really important and sacred space almost, where it's good to be able to say no to something. And Naima said no about a lot of things until she finally said, yes, I'd like to work on that project. So I allowed that space, I respected it, and I think eventually this is what developed our trust. Would you agree, Naima?
Definitely.
All right, thank you very much. We've got about a little over 10 minutes left. Would Paul, would you like to sort of come in and give us like a quick 5 minute of your time to sort of share your point of view about this, the role of the theatre, and so on and so forth?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. No, I would be more than happy to if that's okay with all of you. So it's yes, I mean yes, and yeah, thank you both, Kieran and the speakers as well. This has been a I think a great event so far, and great to be able to hear more about this the work that you've been doing, and of course the links with our journal and the Living Refugee Archive as well. Certainly, just to briefly touch upon kind of where we've gone post publication. Yes, we've just started a project now working with a looking at the way in which theatre can be used as a vehicle for an alternative means of giving voice and documenting refugee voices in East London. This is very much going to be a project that works directly with members of the local Southeast Asian the people in East London. So we very much want this to be a project that they can take ownership of and direct in the way about how we go about documenting their voices in a way that's generally representative of the stories that they want to tell. And certainly we found working with the archive projects we've worked on up until this point that we very much, we don't want the archive just to be a traditional academic focus body of work. We want to engage with alternative methods of representation, alternative methods of wider engagement, to look at different ways that we can document and give agency to the range and scope of the different kind of voices that we want to include. So yes, I've just shared details in the chat of the work that my colleague has just started, Moi Tran, who's a Southeast Asian artist currently based in the London Borough of Hackney. So she's going to be looking to, as part of this project, to set up a civic voices archive working directly with the Southeast Asian organisations and local people in East London. So, and we hope to use that as a basis to develop a range of theatre-based approaches to look at how we can represent these wider testimonies and narratives, hopefully in a new and interesting way. And okay, I'll stop there to allow for other questions, but happy to take questions and by email or whatever as a after this session.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was lovely. We appreciate it. And for those of you who would like to communicate, Paul, is it okay if people sort of just wrote to you and asked you about things outside of this? That would be okay, right?
Absolutely fine. Yeah, more than happy to. That's absolutely
Lovely.
great.
Lovely. Cheers. Thanks so much for that, Paul. That was awesome. We've got time for one last question. And I believe, Ayu, you've had another question asked already in the chat. I hope, Kiran, you can sort of answer that maybe outside of the Q&A here, if we don't have time to return to it, to sort of return to that. Does anybody else have a question to ask before we wrap things up for the day? And I hand it back to Dr. Rusaslina. Anyone? No?
Well, I can just say a final kind of note about
Sure.
reflecting on what Paul just talked about. So the idea that's really, for me, what I love about the project that Paul's been working on is that the idea of research communication is much more living. It's much more alive. We're not talking about preserving a narrative in terms of it's written down, it kind of becomes stale and forgotten. We're talking about keeping it alive. I'm not sure if you guys know about an author called Neil Gaiman. He's one of my favorite authors of all time, so I'm a massive fan. But he does this talk for the 10,000 Years Academy, where they're talking about preserving stories for 10,000 years. And what does that actually mean? And he talks about this wonderful idea of how stories come alive. And what I would love to see, and what I think Paul is doing, is actually making the stories that we often forget, making them alive and keeping them alive. So I hope that you guys really do get in touch with the Living Refugee Archive, because I think there's a lot more that we can do to give life to those stories.
Thanks so much, Kiran. Thank you so much. All right, guys, it is 5:25 in Kuala Lumpur. You know, the storm still rages on, but I really hope that all of us are able to walk away from today's talk really learning something, and not just learning, but relearning as well, about the way we sort of communicate, engage, collaborate, and really work together with communities that we research. You know, they've got as much of a stake in the work that we do, and certainly today's talk is you know, testament that this can be done positively, successfully, and certainly it allows for very different ways to empower very different forms of communities, and even to change the face of research today. So thank you very much, everybody. Please you know, join me in giving a digital round of applause to Kiran and Naima. It was so lovely to have you guys. You know, we can't wait to have you return to us and talk to us about it. But you know, we heard a lot about from Kiran today. Just before we sign off and we give it back to Lynn, Naima, would you like to give us any final words?
I have wrapped up already, so that's all from me.
Okay, no problem at all. Thank you so much for that, Naima. It was really insightful. It was fantastic. I now hand it back to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Lin. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for staying in until the end of this presentation discussion. That was really good. I love sort of the spirit of conversation that we had throughout this whole seminar. Thank you so much to Kiran and Naima for sort of leading us in this conversation. It's really an important conversation. When I first came across Kiran's work and reading through the journal special issue, I realized that, you know, it's something that we really need to have more of these kinds of conversations, especially for our students as they're thinking about their research, and also for ourselves. There are others, some of us have been involved in different forms of action research. I myself work with Orang Asli community, and so it's always good to have these cross conversations and sort of think about how we can continually grow as researchers and work in different ways with the communities that we you know, care and deeply about as well. So thank you in particular to Naima. I think a lot of people were very struck by your presentation, and I think there'll be others will be interested in being in touch and learning more, including myself included here. So I'd like to thank Vila as well for great moderating today. Thank you again to both speakers, and I'd like to also just let people know that we'll be having this regularly every month. Actually now we have one scheduled for the 29th of April with Dr. Arunima Datta. We'll be speaking about migrant Indian women in British Malaya. She's just released a book on this, and she'll be speaking to us from the US. And also on the 21st of May, we have Dr. Nurul Huda, who's currently based in France, but from Cambridge University. And she'll be talking about her research on polygamy. So we'll be posting all this information on our Facebook, Gender Studies University Malaya. So do follow us so that you'll be able to keep track of our very, very exciting lineup of seminars coming up this year, this semester. Thank you again to speakers and to everyone here. Please stay safe and hope to see you again next month or at the end of this month.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.